Hello everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about all the manga I read in September. In terms of volume count, it wasn't that high, but a lot of those volumes I was reading were omnibuses, so my page count ended up being a pretty high amount, so it was a pretty good reading month. And as per usual, I had some bad things, I had some good things, and I had some very good things, so let's go ahead and jump right in. The first manga I read in September is one I've already unhauled, and that was Kingo Used Books. I had volumes 1 through 4, I only read volume 1. This is basically an episodic slice of life manga focusing on this bookstore, this used bookstore, where different characters will come in searching for a manga, usually from their childhood. And we get a little bit of backstory on why the character is so attached to this manga, what it means to them, stuff like that. So in English, this manga was canceled. It only went to 4 volumes, whereas in Japan, I think it went to 17 volumes, something like that. I can totally see why this was canceled in English. It would not do well, I don't think. There's really a lack of localization, and a lot of the manga talked about, even just in the first volume, are very obscure manga that haven't been released in English or are very old. So that, combined with the fact that I couldn't connect to any of the stories or characters in the first volume, meant that there was really nothing making me want to read the rest of the volume, so I quickly unhauled that one. So if you're thinking about picking this up, unless you're like a huge slice of life reader and you really find very obscure manga incredibly interesting, maybe you'll like this, but I personally would not recommend it at all. The next manga I have to talk about is the only other one in this video that I'm going to unhaul, and that is Ten Dance. I read the first 2.5 volumes of this. So I read this because I heard it was a BL manga with some sports manga elements in terms of competitive dance. There's supposed to be this rivalry between these two characters, and while that's kind of true, the competition part is not there. It doesn't work as a sports manga for me personally. But again, I did only read 2.5 volumes, so I may not have gotten far enough for that to be a huge factor in this manga. The other parts were okay, but I didn't enjoy reading it. And if you want my incredibly honest opinion, it's that the author seems to just want to use this manga as an excuse to draw 2 men in various dance poses with pretty flowers around them, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't make for an interesting read, so I went ahead and I'm going to unhaul this one as well. The next manga I read in September was The Heart of Thomas by Moto Hagio. So this is set in a German boys' boarding school, and it takes place after a boy named Thomas has died recently, and it was a pretty known rumor that he had feelings for another boy in the boarding school. And very soon after that, a new person comes to the boarding school who looks very similar to Thomas, and there's kind of a mystery element there. So this is very much a character drama. It focuses on a couple different relationships and the conflicts that happen between them. It also has a lot of religious imagery, which I didn't actually notice until about halfway through the volume. So I would definitely like to reread this in the future to see more of that imagery, to figure out the symbolism there. All of the characters in here were pretty memorable, and it explores various themes like trauma and loneliness. One of the most interesting parts of reading this manga is the editor's note at the end that provides some historical context for this manga. So this manga was published when the shoujo demographic was really going through a lot of upheaval. There was a lot of change happening in the demographic at the time. So this was not only one of the first BL manga, but also one of the first shoujo manga that dealt heavily with trauma and themes of that nature. Not only was it thematically innovative, but the physical release of this was also pretty unique. So just before this was released, The Rose of Versailles came out, and it was one of the first times where shoujo manga was put in a collected format, not just released weekly or monthly in a magazine and then thrown away. They actually collected it in a volume format, and that was very successful for Rose of Versailles. So this was put out as a kind of competition for Rose of Versailles. So this manga did not do very well in the magazine format. It was pulling very badly, but the author wanted to keep writing it, so she was allowed to, and then when the first trade paperback was released, it did very well, so that's how we got the story that we have. So this is why I love reading classic manga, because not only can you see how current manga were influenced by older manga, but you also usually get to learn about the historical context and the kind of space it was being published in, how it was innovative, and why it's so memorable today. So another great work by Moto Hagio. She is definitely one of my favorite authors now. I will buy pretty much any manga of hers that comes out, or that I can get my hands on in general. So yes, a great manga here. The next manga I read was also a classic one-shot, and that was Ode to Kirihito by Osamu Tezuka. This is a manga about a guy who is a doctor, and he is studying this disease that turns people into beasts or dogs or something like that. He is sent off to this remote village where it seems that this disease comes from, and things happen from there. And it's basically a medical thriller following that doctor and a couple different characters, and they all have different agendas. Some of them are more noble than others. There are a lot of terrible characters doing terrible things in this manga, as per usual with Osamu Tezuka, and the narrative doesn't necessarily denounce these characters for the terrible things that they do, so just be aware of that. But there's some really interesting conversations around religion, de-evolution, lack of humanity. I am personally not a religious person, but I do like reading about religion in manga and novels. Another thing I wanted to note about this manga in particular is the very unique paneling. So here's one page I'll show you with the very unique paneling. It really shows the character's mental state or a process of change. Osamu Tezuka does that in quite a few of his manga that I've read, and I always find it interesting to read. So I enjoyed this one so much that I went ahead and bought a bunch more Osamu Tezuka works that I'm going to try. Obviously, this is another classic manga, so it's not going to be for everyone, but again, I like seeing where manga has come from. The next manga I read was definitely the vast majority of my reading for the month. So I read volumes 1 through 17 of Yoi Pedal, or omnibuses rather. I'm going to stop there for now until I figure out the best way to catch up, because these arcs are very, very long and the translations are not cut up, so I might have to watch the anime and I have to prepare myself for that. But I will talk about the first 17 omnibuses that I read. In my interpretation, there are two types of sports manga. There's the more realistic types like Slam Dunk and Haikyuu, and there's the very exaggerated, over-the-top types like Hiroko's basketball. And I personally don't have a preference either way. I enjoy both of them for different reasons. But if you are looking at my favorite sports manga, they tend to be the more realistic ones. So I have previously watched about 21 episodes of the anime of this manga, and I thought that this would be one of the more realistic ones. It's not. This is definitely a very over-the-top, exaggerated sports manga, and I had a ton of fun with this manga. All of the highly exaggerated characters are very funny to me, very entertaining. It adds for some really crazy scenes, some pretty high action, a lot of heart-pumping moments that I definitely enjoyed. So if I didn't have that kind of barrier of not being able to catch up with the manga, I would have read the entire thing this month. That's how much fun I'm having. I love reading a sports manga for the first time. There are very few things that can get me pumped up and as excited as reading a sports manga for the first time. So I'm very happy I finally got to this month. I'm going to figure out how to catch up as soon as possible. So if you're looking for another sports manga to read and you're on the fence about this one, I would definitely recommend it, as long as you don't mind the very exaggerated characters and situations. It's just a ton of fun and I can't wait to read more. The next manga I read in September was Music of Marie. This is by Usamaru Furuya. He did the manga adaptation of No Longer Human, or one of them anyway, but this takes place in the pretty far future on an island which worships a giant robot in the sky. It follows two characters who live on that island, and one of the characters can kind of hear what the giant robot has to say. And it explores a pretty interesting moral dilemma about free will that doesn't really have a correct answer. I would say this manga is pretty introspective and character driven. There's not a lot of action. It does kind of remind me of Nausicaa, actually, especially with the setting and the theme. Overall, I wasn't sure what to expect from this manga, but I definitely thought it was very interesting and I'm glad I read it. And the last manga I read in September was My Love Mixup. I read all 9 volumes. This is about this character right here. If you can see, he has a crush on a girl in his class, and he borrows her eraser one day and notices that on the eraser there is the name of another boy, and that boy sees him using that eraser and assumes that he has a crush on him. So if you've been here for a while, you know that I don't read a lot of romance manga. I wanted to try this one because it does have the LGBT elements, and I definitely enjoyed it. I had a fun time with it, but I didn't love it, and that's definitely because it's a romance manga. It actually reminds me a lot of My Love Story, and while there was nothing wrong with My Love Story, I did not care for it that much personally. This one I definitely enjoyed more than that, just because the humor really carries this manga. I thought it was very funny. I found myself laughing out loud several times, so the humor definitely made me enjoy it enough to keep it on my shelves. And if I was someone who enjoyed romance, I probably would be giving all of these volumes a higher rating. I ended up giving most of them 3 stars, which for me is not a bad rating. 3 stars is kind of a catch-all rating for me, but this one was definitely on the higher end of the 3-star scale. So definitely one I enjoyed, but not a new favorite or anything. So yeah, those were all the manga I read in September. If you've read any of these, let me know your thoughts on them, or let me know what you read in the month. But that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!